Welcome to the Just Ingredients podcast. I'm Cara Lynn, and here we talk all things nourishing to the mind, body, and soul. This is a place where you can find just good ingredients to life. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Today I have Brian Sanders, the filmmaker behind the Food Lies documentary. He is also the host of the Top 5 Nutrition podcast, Peak Human, and an international speaker. He works to spread the awareness of regenerative agriculture and increases access to well-raised animal products through his nationwide meat and body care company, Nose to Tail. I'm excited to talk to him about his documentary and all things real food today. Welcome to the show, Brian.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Like I said, I'm really excited to talk to you about your documentary and your company and just so many different things. But first of all, will you just tell my listeners a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure, yeah. I kind of fell into this health and food industry by just fixing my own health by changing my diet. So I was a mechanical engineer by trade, which helped a lot, really coming from a background of root cause thinking and technical, science where it didn't make sense if you just say follow what the government guidelines say because I did that and I got sick and my parents got sick. And when you start to think about it more critically and, from a root cause perspective, you realize that their guidelines, not to jump too far ahead in the story, but the guidelines are based on different things other than health, right? They could be based on money and food availability and the USDA trying to promote agriculture instead of just promote people's health. So it, yeah, it was sort of a wake up call 10 years ago. I lost both my parents. And at the same time, I turned 30 and I started changing my diet because I was becoming like every other 30-year-old. The standard dad bod, different conditions popping up. All these things started happening and I changed my diet and they all went away. And I lost over 20 pounds of fat. My whole body changed. My everything changed. And so I've just been on this mission ever since, full time, 7 years, to let people know, let them know how easy it is to change your diet and how, yeah, there's a lot of lies out there.
You would think it would be easy, but for some, it's definitely not. You said you lost both your parents 10 years ago, so you were young.
Yeah, I was 30. I was 30. So my dad had cancer and my mom had Alzheimer's. So 10 years ago, she was already really just not doing well, couldn't communicate well. And then around 7 or 8 years ago, when I started going full time, she was just gone. And
Sad.
yeah, so she was incapacitated, like unable to open her eyes even for the last 3 years. And we finally lost her about 4 months ago.
I am assuming that just fed the fire, fueled the fire, I should say, just gave you that spark to even want to fight this more.
Yes, I mean, it's a blessing in disguise, and I just didn't wanna fall to the same fate because they did follow the guidelines. I remember growing up until I was 30, we were doing everything correctly according to the guidelines. We were eating low-fat foods, avoiding red meat, avoiding saturated fat, just doing it, We grew up cooking our own meals too. Like, my family did not go out to eat. It wasn't, like we were just always out at restaurants. Anything it was a huge treat for us to go out cooking, whole grains, lean chicken, vegetables, like doing everything. And I mean, there's worse foods than that. Of course, processed foods are bad, but we were doing the healthy versions of these foods. And I think they can be okay for a while, but the crazy thing is how it just creeps up on you.
Yeah.
It's this long-term damage that it does, or it's this long-term overeating that happens, or just not giving you the proper nutrients, and it's processed, even though they're less processed than a candy bar, it still will have these long-term results. So I think that's what happens to them. They call Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes now, right? It's just like insulin resistance of the brain. If you're just not getting properly nourished your entire life and eating the wrong foods, slowly happens. My dad with the cancer slowly happens. They were not obese at all. They were just, standard American overweight look where they just carried extra fat especially a lot of visceral fat that it's in and around the organs, and I can now that I know what happened, I can tell, and, like, kinda going through their medical records a little bit. And so, you just don't notice it, right? You just get older, and then all these conditions pop up, and no one blames the food.
Right, they don't. Well, they just think, "Oh, we're aging," or "This is how we're supposed to feel," or "This is normal. We're eating healthy, we're eating the chicken and just the veggies," things like that. So, we're gonna talk about some of this, but first of all, let's start by talking about your documentary because you have created a documentary called Food Lies. So, was it this that inspired you, your parents, and your health journey, or something else?
Yeah, it was this, and part of it was just, like I said before, how easy it was to switch and how quickly it happened for me. And so I went on this journey. It started as a documentary, but it's been 7 years and it's still not done because it keeps changing and getting better and it's evolving. So now it's a 6-part series. So now it's more of, like a Netflix series, something that is really entertaining, easy for someone to watch. We have an avatar we call Joe Cheeto. And so we're kind of making it for Joe Cheeto, which is, a man or woman. It doesn't have to be Joe, right? There's just this avatar of someone who's in the middle of the country, just doesn't know anything about food, is probably sitting on the couch eating Cheetos and drinking Mountain Dew, watching Netflix, and then they come across this, and they can watch it, and by the end of the 6 parts, they can really understand nutrition and health because no one has done this before. The main documentaries out there are vegan, right? It's Game Changers, it's the Blue Zones thing, it's all these things, the Cowspiracy, right? For years, every couple of years, a new one comes out from the animal rights people, and they're not really concerned with true health. They don't really know about true health. They just know that they don't want animals to die, which is a separate story. And we can talk about the ethics if you want, but that's a whole nother story. What we need to focus on is human thriving and our sick care system failing. Like we're gonna be bankrupt as a country if we don't figure this out. And it's not going well.
Like you said, there's so many documentaries out there about being vegan. So what is the main message of the documentary? Because it's not just about eating meat.
No, no, no. It's yeah, some people think it's some sort of carnivore thing. I've never been carnivore. I know I'm friends with all the carnivore people, and I think it's good for people to wake up about red meat and realize it's not bad for you. But that's not the focus of the film. A lot of people put this little war of plant to animal foods, right? It's a war against plants versus animal. And that's not at all the war at all. I just don't think vegan is appropriate for humans. From all my research, I've interviewed 300 doctors and scientists by now. And I had no agenda going into it, right? I started 10 years ago. It's not like I was, right now, there's this modern, carnivore. And like, I had none of this. I was just a guy trying to figure it out. So I didn't come here with the bias. And I really tried to stay unbiased this whole time. And the plant to animal is not the right war. It's the process to whole, right? It's
Mm.
processed foods versus whole foods is the war that we are fighting. So this film goes through every argument you need to know to understand what we should eat. Right? The real question is, what should we eat? How do we be healthy? How do we not get sick and die of chronic diseases like everyone else? And to tell that story, you need to start from the beginning. We need to start about like looking at our human body and how it's changed and how once we started eating more animal foods, our digestive system changed and how our body is designed to eat high quality, nutrient dense animal foods. And that doesn't mean we're eating only animal foods. Or it doesn't mean plant foods are bad. It just means we have to look at how we were really, I keep saying designed, but how we created whatever your beliefs are and how we got here. It's just we are here in this body and it is working well. Works best with the foods which we ate for all of history. It's very simple. It's like every other animal eats what it's supposed to eat, right? And we don't contest that. Right? It's just funny that with humans, there's this huge debate. But with any other animal, we just know. And if that animal doesn't get what they're supposed to eat, it gets sick. And dogs, right? Our pets are getting sick and they're getting diabetes and this obese. They're getting the same diseases humans get because they're eating kibble or more processed foods, right? And so then a vet would, if there's a problem, if they're a half decent veterinarian, they would say there's a obesity or type 2 diabetes in the dog. They'd say, well, we got to change the food and they need to be eating real foods, give them meat, give them, real things that they're supposed to eat. And we don't think about that with humans. And part of the problem is because humans are really adaptable and we're geniuses, really. We've been so smart that we've populated every part of the globe. We can live in the north, we can live on the equator, we can live in the snow. And so we found ways to get foods from our environment. But nowadays, and it's very diverse, right? For all the diverse environments, and it's all different foods. But what there was a common theme of all these foods were nutrient dense, and they were all focused on a foundation of some sort of animal nutrition. And where it could be fish, it could be small little animals, it could be giant bison, whatever environment we're in, we found good quality nutrition from animal foods. It could be oysters, just collecting oysters, simple things. And then we filled in the diet with what other foods were around us and very different around the world. So very, very, so when people try to think about diet nowadays, they just think, oh, well, no one knows, or it's so different, or everyone's so different. And they have all these kind of excuses. And it's not really true. It's like, yes, there's a great variety of foods that can provide us with the same nutrition, but there is a human nutrition requirement. And, yeah, that's what people don't understand.
Yeah, it seems so simple in my mind, but I know it's not because, I mean, I teach every single day to millions of followers, about eating real food, real whole food. But somehow we have gotten away from this. We ate real food for thousands and thousands of years, and now we think it's okay to eat all this processed packaged food and that will be okay. And like you said, how did we get here?
Well, there's 2 stories. There's one, like, technically how we got here, which I can go over briefly, but the overarching thing of how we got here is that humans are smart. And so we kind of outsmarted ourselves by thinking that we could just package foods, have a longer shelf life, process them down, and they would just be the same. It was sort of like a big accident where we didn't know what the consequences were. And part of that is because we think all calories are the same. This is why I push back against the calories in, calories out stuff, right? And it's this huge debate on the internet, and there's tons of people. Usually it's like the lifter bros, they're like, oh, all you got to do is create a calorie deficit. And even up to the top, to the USDA and all of the, presidents that have been, I remember, Michelle Obama's like, just, move, get out there and move. And they just make it about eat less, move more. They even Coca-Cola funds these things. You've heard of these big organizations that just, it was something about a calorie balance consortium. I don't remember the name of it, but of course Coca-Cola wants to push this message of all calories are the same, because then if you're obese, it's just your fault because you didn't
Right.
work out enough, and you should be able to drink Coca-Cola and be fine. You just need to work out more. And that's not at all true. And I don't know if you want to go into that, because it's debate. It's a big debate.
I understand that debate because I've tried to teach for years about the calories in, calories out. And so I know there are debaters out there. And so have they just not educated themselves yet on true nutrition and what the food can provide nutritiously for you?
Well, I think it's because some of these people, they are lifting bros. And so they have done it where they have lost weight and created a better body composition by counting calories, right? So it's like, I don't deny that you can do that. I'm just saying that that's not healthy and that's not going to work for most people, and that there's more beyond that. right? So they are ignoring some things, and they're also just going off personal experience and kind of not considering the bigger picture. So I explain food as four things, right? And your body doesn't care the name of your diet. Just think of it this way: it does not care what the name of your
I
diet.
love that.
It just wants protein, vitamins and minerals, fats, and carbs, right? I mean, these are the four
Love it.
things that foods are, right? So the protein, vitamins, and minerals, these are your nutrients. These are your bodybuilding foods. This is what builds your organs, your muscle, your bones, everything. Like this is what your body's made of. And then fat and carbs, kind of mainly energy. There's definitely some benefits. There's good fats and essential fats, but generally the fat and carbs you eat are for energy. And so for all of history, if we just ate the whole foods around us, we would get the correct amount of nutrients, right? We get the correct amount of protein, vitamins, and minerals, and we get the correct amount of energy, whatever that was, to get us through the day, right? So the two different things, two completely different types of calories. Nowadays, we're eating processed foods and just empty foods, even just bread. Bread is does not have a lot of nutrients and it has a lot of energy. So the foods that we eat around us are the opposite. Now we're not getting enough nutrients and we're getting too much energy, right? So now our body is always trying to get more of the building blocks, always wanting more quality, complete protein, more vitamins and minerals, and they're not there in the foods, so we keep eating, right? We're compelled to keep eating, and the food is so that's really the biggest problem with processed food is it is not natural to our bodies. Like the composition of it is not correct. So no matter how much of we eat of it, it's not giving us what we need, so we have to eat more. And they've even done studies with this on this through tons of different animals, from crickets to mice to bigger animals to humans. And they're very consistent that show this result that if you are eating low protein, low nutrient food, you will keep eating too much, right? And then that's how you become fat. So it's way more than calories. It's about the composition of the foods. So I'll tell you this mice study real quick. So they gave mice the two different groups, and they had one group, they got the correct amount of protein in the food, and then the correct, the energy, the fats and the carbs, or whatever the mice needed. They ate all the food. They were the correct weight. They died correctly. They had the right amount of offspring. Everything was normal. Then they took another food, the rodent chow, and they lowered the protein, right? They lowered the nutrients. They lowered protein, and they just put in more fats and carbs. And the mice in that group overate. They just had to eat more of the food to get the same amount of protein and nutrients. And so they even did the math on it, and they saw that the mice in each group ate to get the same amount of protein, but the group in the processed diet. See, the second group was basically a version of processed foods that had low protein, higher energy, and that group, they both ate the same amount of protein, but the other group had to eat more food, more calories, more empty calories to get the same amount of protein. And those mice died earlier, they had less offspring, and they became obese. And so it's
Interesting.
exactly what happens in humans.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, you talk about those empty carbs or the processed white, flour, white sugar carbs, and you do have to just eat more and more and more of that to get those vitamins, minerals, protein, any of that. So it completely makes sense. So in your documentary, Food Lies, so obviously one of the things that you talk about is this packaged food, I'm assuming, about the calories in, calories out. I'm curious about the other food lies you talk about. I'm assuming there's something in there about meat and saturated fats?
Yeah. So that's kind of the original food lie is back in the 50s, President Eisenhower had a heart attack. No one really knew about nutrition science yet because we didn't have all the chronic diseases yet, but heart disease was just starting. And there were some theories, and one theory was that it was saturated fat, and one theory was that it was refined carbs, refined sugars, and vegetable oils. And so there was this kind of competition between who was right, and the other the guy on the saturated fat side was named Ansel Keys, another guy was named John Yudkin. So John Yudkin was from Britain, and he saw that whenever British colonies popped up around the world and they started getting the sugar, the flour, and the oil, those populations became sick very quickly. They got the diseases of civilization. So his idea was that this is the problem. It's the refined sugars and grains and the fake fats, right? The vegetable oils. They had these back in the early 1900s. And Ansel Keys basically just won the argument. He was on the other side, and this is a sort of old story. If people have heard the Ansel Keys story a million times, but this happened between the 50s and the 80s. Ultimately, when we got the dietary guidelines, is that they just went with the correlation that the countries that had more saturated fat had more heart disease. So the story goes is he just showed the 7 countries that fit that little idea that he had, and he ignored the other 22. There's 22 total, right? So this whole idea was based on bad science, right? That saturated fat was bad, and the thing is we haven't undone any of that bad science because my view on it, and most people I know share this opinion, is that because there's so much money being made and you can't turn it around. So, right, we got it wrong back then. We got it wrong that saturated fat was a problem. So we started taking out animal fat in all the foods and replacing it with seed oils and just more. You got to make it taste good. So you got to put in some more refined sugars, just stuff everything with refined grains. And told people to just count calories, and not eat too much. But it just doesn't work, right? If you do this for multiple years, and you can see the graphs of all the disease, all the overeating, everything that happened in the U.S. and then around the world because of this mistake that we thought that saturated fat was a problem. And so, yes, and to answer your question about meat, that ties into the meat as well, right? So they're saying to reduce meat consumption because it has a lot of saturated fat, reduce egg consumption because it has cholesterol, right? And so finally, they're kind of going back and forth on eggs over the decades, but they were demonizing eggs for so long because it has cholesterol, and we found out there's actually new studies that show that eating cholesterol doesn't just raise your cholesterol. Cholesterol is a natural thing your body needs to make hormones, and your body makes its own cholesterol. So eating cholesterol is not the problem. So yeah, the biggest food lies out there they're all kind of combined in that they once you think that saturated fat is bad and cholesterol is bad, then you start avoiding red meat and eggs and all this stuff, and then you start eating more sugars and flour and fake fats that have, the polyunsaturated fat that they think is better for you. And it's not. And, there's finally some newer science coming out to show that we got this wrong, but no one's seeing it, right? Because everyone's making too much money. There's been huge industries, huge, everything is built on this way of eating, and you can't just change that.
Yeah, it's crazy to me that we're still believing this, and I know it's because of these huge food industries that wanna make money, but at the same time, I'm like, we've known for years that this is not the way. I mean, I remember back in the '90s, it was the big low-fat, non-fat craze. I fell for it. I was in college, and I'm trying to, eat all low-fat and non-fat, and then I ended up with the worst health crisis ever, and my body just falling apart, and so I had to go on a health journey and relearn everything. But I'm thinking that is years ago, and we still have influencers out there today saying, "Count your macros, eat the non-fat stuff, eat the low-fat stuff, lower your fat." And I'm like, "How does this change? How do we educate people?"
Well, people need to try it for themselves too. I mean, I love social media because the opposite story gets out there too. There's so many
That's true.
stories, yeah, of people saying, I did the opposite of what I was told, and everything got better. There's so many ex-vegans, right? These people that say, "Hey, I did that, and it worked a little bit in the beginning because yeah, you're eating more full whole foods. You're cutting out bad stuff, so yeah, you feel better, and you're just eating less overall, and yeah, it can help it a little bit, but that's just not what humans are meant to eat. But basically, there's a lot of good stories out there, and so part of what we do is we just have podcasts like this and social media. we just got to spread the word, and that's what Food Lies is. It's the ultimate way to spread the word because the government's not going to do it for us. They're not going to be like, "Oh, by the way, we were wrong for the past 70 years and we killed, millions of people through our bad information." It's not going to happen. So it's
Right.
it's just we got to do it on our own.
Okay, so in food lies, you talk about the packaged foods, you talk about meats and saturated fats. Do you talk about then the food pyramid and what a lie that was?
Yeah. Yeah, so the middle, like, we start from the beginning, right, of episode 1 of just, like, what are our bodies made to consume. We get into the whole agricultural revolution, actually, and we talk about how grains, we 12,000 years ago, it's not like we were thinking of, "Oh, man, how are we gonna get the proper nutrition?" We were just thinking of how to feed ourselves, and we invented grains, and we actually got shorter back then. We actually got more disease, smaller brains, shorter, and, you can see this in the archaeological record that we were worse off once we started relying on a whole bunch of grains for our nutrition because it pushed out the good nutrition, right? So there's a whole story there of kind of, yes, this concept of nutrients versus energy and that. And then we get into by episode 3 and 4, we get into the food pyramid, the bad science, right? We kind of take people through. Like you have to learn this story to really understand why your doctors are wrong, right? Because if you can't just have some guy on social media say, "Hey, just eat a bunch of whole foods and red meat's fine and get rid of all this," and then you just believe them. You need, people need to see why. And so we very carefully go through this whole story while still making it interesting of what we got wrong back starting in the 50s, and then how that led to the food pyramid, and how there was a lot of industry funding for the food pyramid. And we had a whole bunch of corn, wheat, and soy. The US has millions of acres of corn, wheat, and soy, and we subsidize it. It's partly on purpose because there's a whole story even with World War II and trying to feed people. And we were like exporting all this stuff to try to help feed the other countries, our allies. And then we had a surplus of it. And it's interesting, the USDA had a dual mandate. So not only were they supposed to provide nutrition guidelines, but they're also supposed to support farming. And so there's a big conflict of interest there, right? So we're like, okay, we have millions of acres of corn, wheat, and soy. So yeah, so this stuff is healthy. Let's make the entire base of the food pyramid the stuff that we have millions and millions of tons of. And then it got even
Interesting.
worse when they're inventing pesticides and glyphosate, and covering it with this, right? And these foods got worse and worse for us, and they just took up more and more of our diet. And so that story's there in the middle of the series.
And so that is how the base of the food pyramid became grains is we just had these millions of acres of the wheat, corn, and soy?
That's part of it. That's part of it because the USDA. So another part of it is an interesting story that I learned while making Food Lies. It'll be out next year. It's a long process, but they had a version of the food pyramid or the early food guidelines that was more whole foods. It was meat and eggs and dairy and fresh fruits and vegetables and some grains. So it wasn't that bad, really. You could eat that
Yeah.
today, especially if you're making your own sourdough bread, maybe, and you're doing it correctly and using the right ingredients, it could be okay. But so they got this, and then the USDA was like, "Well, wait a second. We're gonna have to pay," or the other parts of the government, or we're gonna have to pay for all these programs like food stamps, the early versions of food stamps, the military, the nursing homes, schools, right? The government is in charge of subsidizing or paying for all of these foods for people. So they realize, okay, wait a second. If we're saying that all these fresh meats and fresh dairy and fresh fruits and
Mm,
vegetables are what you should be eating, how are we going to pay for all this? How are we going to do these
wow.
government programs and pay and give this away to the food stamp program? And so that was a big part of it. Is they went back and they made it up to 7 to 11 servings of grains. Right? It was not that high before, and once to fit the budget, basically they had to do that.
That is fascinating. So at the same time they're creating this food pyramid, we're also hearing that saturated fat is not good for us and we need less red meat.
It's a tactic that people use in all kinds of industries, is you need an enemy and you need to kind of shift the blame. So in this case, the real enemy is processed foods. Right? It's just so clear. We can it's almost like you don't even need to do a study. We just know
Mhm.
that for all of history we ate whole foods and now we started messing with the foods and now we're all sick. The genius thing is they in the processed foods are clearly the problem, but they blame it on meat and saturated fat, right? They have to shift the blame, and this is still going on to this day. All
It
in the
is.
news, right? It's like, "Oh, cows are ruining the environment," "They're causing climate change." Like, cows are not causing climate change. There's a lot of other problems in the world, right? There's, like, factories, there's there's some problems going on of polluting the air. It is not cows. We've always had these giant animals. We've had bison, we've had all these different versions of cows, ruminants, right? Goats, sheep. Creating methane. That is not the problem at all. And so they're just kind of shifting the blame. And now they have all these fake food, right? There's fake meat companies, there's alternatives, protein alternatives. There's so many other big industries popping up that want to sell something to you, and so they have to have an enemy. And it's very convenient to just blame it on red meat and saturated fat. And that means we have to take those away and put in more just cheap fillers, basically grains, sugars, vegetable oils, all the cheapest stuff. So actually, I learned how this works very acutely because I started a company called Nose to Tail uh, 5 years ago, and I just was like, well, I'm into regenerative agriculture. I want to provide people with meat. I want to help farmers, ranchers, raise animals properly. And it's all good. This is gonna be great. I'm gonna, create a business for myself, and it's all gonna be good. It didn't work at all. I don't sell meat anymore because there's no money. There's no profit margin in the meat because it is a whole food. So then I realized how the world works is that there's no profit margin on meat, eggs, milk, fruit, vegetables. Just if you're anything, if you just, there's no one getting rich off apples. It's just there's no profit margin on it. You can get a bag of organic apples for like $4. Like, it's amazing how cheap it is because no one's making money off it. And so I really realized this. Like, I had to stop my business because there's no profit margin on Whole Foods, and I have my tagline: "The profits in the processing." So I was like, "This is it. This makes so much more sense now." You can get a box of cereal and it's 5 cents worth of cereal. The box probably costs more than the cereal, probably 6 cents for the box, and then you sell it for $5. Huge profit margin, right? Then you
Yep.
times that by billions and billions of boxes sold, and then you have all the money to do all the commercials, right? Why is our TV and everything blanketed with commercials? Oh, breakfast cereal, Kellogg's, this and that. It's because they have this huge profit margin. They can spend billions and billions on marketing. They can do fake studies, right? They can fund these studies that make it seem that it's okay. And they can also do lobbying, billions of dollars in lobbying to keep this system to where it is, way it is. And the opposite, we have just little ranchers trying to do their thing, farmers trying to grow a apple. They have no money. I'm telling you, I know these people, and I was one of these companies that tried to do it, and you cannot make big money off of Whole Foods. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, I know exactly where you're coming from because we make like protein powders, electrolytes, things like that, but we flavor it with real food. So, like real strawberries, real mangoes, not natural flavors or artificial flavors or anything. And it's very, very expensive to bring in those fruits to use as the flavoring. And our profit margins are terrible.
Mhm.
And it's because of that. I could make so much more money if I just used a natural or artificial flavor in there. So I get it. It's really hard. Let's take a quick break to hear from our show sponsor. Looking to refresh your routine for the new year? Start strong with nourishing, effective products from Just Ingredients. Whether your goal is to boost energy, improve immunity, achieve better sleep, support weight management, or build strength, Just Ingredients has you covered with solution-focused products made to help you thrive. Each product is crafted with nourishing, non-toxic ingredients you can trust, making it easy to prioritize your health and wellness goals for 2025. Feel good about what you're using, inside and out. Ready to make the switch? Visit justingredients.us and discover how healthy living can transform your year. Kick off your healthiest year yet with Just Ingredients, because you deserve better. Now back to the show. Is one of the food lies that you talk about in the show the whole farming practices we have? Because there's a lot of issues with what the government subsidizes and doesn't subsidize and things like that. Do you talk about that?
Yeah, so that's kind of the culmination. So after I kind of got to when I was saying episodes 3 and 4, we're talking about the food pyramid, the bad science. We go over some good science of, well, actually there is good science showing that red meats, fat is perfectly good for you. Processed foods are bad. Then we kind of sum it up into like really easy to understand takeaways of how to live, right? So we give people the idea of like how to arm themselves with the correct information. And then episode 6 is about environment and ethics. And we go into the practices and how we can do this sustainably, and we get into regenerative ag, and we get into everything to do with the soil. We keep it interesting though. There's been whole documentaries made on the soil, and I don't think many people have watched them. Even though it's good quality documentaries, Kiss the Ground, there's another one, Common Ground, coming out. But it's just not very interesting for the normal people to learn about. So we kind of put it in the end and make it fun and interesting, where you realize that, oh, everything makes sense now. So we do want to eat whole foods. We do want to eat, red meat is perfectly fine for us. Eggs are perfectly fine for us. But how do we do it correctly? And the answer is, yeah, with regenerative methods, with no-till farming, with holistic management, all these ways of doing things without the pesticides and without, uh, yeah, just the bad practices. And people are doing it on big scales. There's Gabe Brown. He has 5,000-acre farm that's getting bigger, and he's doing this on a huge scale. People might have heard of White Oak Pastures. This guy, Will Harris, he's been doing it, I forget how many generations, like 7 generations. He went on Joe Rogan's podcast and talked about it. It's amazing. It's getting more into the mainstream, what he's doing. And he's using all these regenerative methods that are actually helping the soil. It's actually putting carbon back in the soil. It's not using pesticides. It, it's using animals and plants in harmony. This is how nature works. And so, he has these big chicken kind of barns on wheels almost. They're big, and all these chickens can live out there on the grass and eat all the bugs and worms and root around and eat the grasses, and all their manure is fertilizing the soil. And so they have this big kind of barn type structure that has no base, no bottom on it, and it's on wheels, and then they can move it every day. And he has tons of these, and you can see that after he moves it, it's all green and lush, and his grass is growing better. And so all these eggs that he has are just so healthy, and the chicken is just raised correctly and getting all the nutrients it needs and makes the chicken healthier, and does the same thing with the cattle. So you can have these different paddocks, and it's really simple these days. They invented like this really simple electrical wire, and you can just run it through a giant field. So if you have giant plots of land, you can make individual paddocks out of one little strand of electric wire that the cows know to not touch. It doesn't hurt. I mean, I've touched it. It's not like it's gonna kill you. It just like stings you a little bit. And and so they move the cattle each day, and so they graze appropriately on this part of the grass. They put down their manure, and they keep going. And this actually helps build the soil back to where it used to be. It doesn't. All these methods don't require outside inputs. If you do it correctly, you're not having to buy fake fertilizers. You're not using pesticides. You're just doing it properly. And he's growing tons of food for people. So is Gabe Brown. So is Joel Salatin. Joel Salatin's in my series. Like, all these people are doing it. They just had to go off on their own, and no one was funding them. Couldn't get loans for this. So you have to be part of the system to get your loans, and farmers don't have money, so they have to rely on loans to buy all their feed and buy all their inputs. And if you do this way of regenerating the land, you can't get the same loans, you can't get the crop insurance, you can't do any of this. So it really is sad that they had to find a way to do it on their own, and they each have their own story of how they got there. Gabe Brown, actually, there was hailstorms, years and years in a row, and he kept losing all his crops, and he was bankrupt, basically, and just had to figure it out on his own because there was no other option. But the good thing is people are doing it, it is possible, and people are now supporting it and doing it more. If there's a more of a demand for it, then it funds these people trying to do it correctly.
Yeah, it is really sad, I think, because I've actually talked to a lot of farmers as well. And it's why I always tell people go support your local farmers who are trying to do things right, and doing the regenerative agriculture and all of that. But I was talking to one recently who was like, look, I believe in the organic. Like, I want the regenerative, I want to do all that, but I can't afford it. I just can't. Like, I've got to feed my family. I have to keep the farm going. If I do only that, I won't make money. And so then he has a whole separate part of his land that is made purely for the GMO corn and GMO soy so that he can be subsidized by the government. And I'm like, that is wrong. Like, the government needs to be subsidizing the regenerative stuff.
You know, Completely correct, and I think it can happen, right? It's just gonna be slow. So, these things are slow, and actually Gabe Brown told me probably 7 years ago when I first started, I had a phone call with him. He said, "Guess what? I can't tell you who, but big corporations are contacting me and wanting to learn about regenerative, or they're investing in it." And now I've seen some of those investments actually come through, and some companies actually helped sponsor the White Oak Pasture study that showed that it was actually putting carbon back in the soil, that it was actually like good for the land. So as these companies are realizing that they can make more money by getting into this. So it's not always good. There's a term called greenwashing, which is sort of like fake green solutions, where companies will just say, "Oh, this is so healthy because of this," but it's actually not. But there's a good side to company greed, and it's like there is a way to use it's like the judo, right? Use their momentum against them, of these big corporations just being after money. Well, which is what they do, right? They have shareholders, and their whole thing is to make money. So if there's a consumer demand, if it's getting more popular for regenerative this or grass fed that, that you pasture raise eggs, and if there's a demand, people will pay, dollar extra. I mean, I only get those type of things. I get the eggs. I go to the farmer's market. I'm happy to pay $8 for some eggs. I'm here in Austin. It's pretty expensive. You don't have to pay $8 for eggs, but I get the very best eggs. They are out on the land, moving every day, and I'm happy to pay for it. Right? It's just like maybe it's $7. I get the jumbo one, so maybe it's $7. Right? Yes, it's a little more, but I'm getting way more nutrients. I'm getting these deep orange yolks. I'm happy to support them. I'm happy to spend more of my budget on food. That's what we used to do. Actually, there's all these figures of throughout history, we always spent more of our budget, whatever it was, on food, right? They can look at the ratios of the percentages. And nowadays, people want to spend like the lowest possible amount of money on food just so they can buy stupid stuff, right? This consumer culture, they're just buying random throwaway clothes, fast fashion, whatever, video game type stuff. I don't spend money on that stuff. I spend money like we used to on good quality food. So it's actually not impossible.
Yeah. I know I tell people you invest in your food now or you're going to invest in your medical bills later.
Oh, no, that it's absolutely true. The problem is there's just a problem with humans is we don't have that long-term thinking. It's very
That's
hard.
true.
You can
It's
tell
the
someone
now.
that, and then the next day, it's just, well, I don't know. This fast food meal is like $7, and a good meal at some, whatever is like 14. So I'm just gonna get the fast food meal. But so it's just hard. The long-term thinking, you have to really just start thinking long term, and then also just making your own food. I mean, you could make your own meal with regenerative meat for $7.
So I'm curious, in the documentary, do you talk about the cows and climate change and those lies behind that, or
Oh, yeah,
no?
yeah. So that's episode 6. So episode 6 is debunking all the vegan films. It really is like, not only do we talk about regenerative ag as a solution, we talk about everything that is just bad science or made up or just not true at all, right? The vegans, they're great at coming up with crazy statistics that make it sound terrible. They're like, 2/3 of the land is used for cattle, and that's terrible. I'm like, well, no, not at all. But 2/3 of the land is not usable for crops. We couldn't use this land for anything else. And cattle on grass is a good thing. Like I was just talking
Mhm.
about, if they're grazing it properly, they're regenerating the soil. They're putting manure back on the soil. This is probably even just them eating and their saliva is stimulating the grass to grow again. So it is actually a good thing to have cattle on land, and there's no other things we can do with that land. So we really debunk all of the insane stuff that vegans say, and that's what goes out into mainstream culture too. Because people are like, "Why are you so against vegans?" I'm like, "Well, no, I'm not against individuals eating whatever they want. You can eat whatever you want. I don't care at all. But if you're out there making insane claims, making documentaries that millions of people see that give them completely inaccurate info. That's the problem.
Well, and I was talking to a farmer in Ireland who has, 100% grass-fed cows, and he kept talking about how the cows are good for the soil and how if you do it correctly with moving them throughout your land, it's so great for regenerative farming. And in Ireland, they don't even call it regenerative farming. They just call it that's how you farm. That's the way you do it. That's what we've done for thousands of years. Here in America, we have to call it regenerative farming and put up a fight against it that that's the better way to do things.
It's so sad. Yeah.
Yeah, so it is crazy. Well, I'm glad you talk about that in your movie. I'm also curious, do you talk about the pesticides and herbicides and things that we just have gone rampant with?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we don't do a huge amount of that. I think people kind of know about this already. That just how bad it is. It seems like people are more on against Monsanto and glyphosate. Most people have heard of it.
You would think, you would
Yeah.
think. Every time I talk about glyphosate on my page, oh, the people come out of, "Oh, it's fine, you can eat it, it's not a big deal, it helps with our crop production, blah, blah, blah," you know?
Yeah, well, so we do go into so we prepare the viewers for all the arguments, right? This is our main goal and why it's taken so long. It's taken so long. We've rewritten it. We've reshot so many things, reformulate our entire ideas around this to be more accurate and be more unbiased. And part of that is arming the viewer with not a diet, it's a way of eating, right? It's a way of understanding nutrition so you can formulate your own way of eating, right? And that comes along with way what you're talking about is how to know what's industry propaganda or on the other side of things, right? If we're talking about crop production or food additives and all these other things that people need to worry about, we help people understand and show data on this is a way for them to continue their trillion-dollar industries, right? These food industries and farm industries are in the trillions, actually. So of course they're going to defend their way of doing things. Of course they're going to say that glyphosate is fine, and they'll have some studies to show that, right? But I'm like, okay, well, where did these studies come from? Well, you have to learn about who's funding the studies and their motivations behind it. All this stuff we're talking about, even back to the calories in, calories out. Who's funding this information? Well, it came out, oh, it's Coca-Cola. Like I was talking about, the whatever initiative, the coalition of counting calories, energy consortium balance. It's very obvious when you look into it why and who is doing this. And it's to keep this going. Once you kind of understand this, you can spot it, right? Because then you're like,
Mm.
okay, so you can think more critically. I remember some studies that saying that pasta helps you lose weight. I'm like, what? Well, like, why would pasta help you lose weight? Then I looked into the study and it was funded by Barilla. Barilla is a huge worldwide international pasta company,
Yeah.
right? So it's like you gotta just but the thing is people don't look into it. People don't have time to look into it.
Right.
Like I said, there's a couple problems with human nature. One I said before was that we think short term, right? So it's short term thinking, and another thing is we just don't have time to look into things correctly, and that's not really going to change. Those two things are just part of our life. I don't have time to do it. It's not like I have endless
Right.
time to look into everything. But what I do have is a foundation of knowledge that I've gained that I can think about things critically and understand things on a deeper level. So when I see a study that says pasta helps you lose weight, I can, if I do have time, I can go see that it's funded by Barilla. If I don't have time, I could just be very skeptical of it, right? I'm like, I don't
Mhm.
think that's true. That doesn't really make sense. This is like a highly processed, grain that just it would not do anything for weight loss. I just know. I mean, maybe it's okay, but it's not going to help you lose weight. So you can be critical if you learn the foundational principles.
Yeah, people need to critically think. Okay, I'm curious though, because with my followers, I get all the time like, oh, all of this is so overwhelming. Having to just turn to whole foods rather than packaged food can be time consuming, overwhelming. So, do you have simple steps like in the documentary at all of how people can go from a processed food diet to a whole food based one?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, we try to do a lot of content on that, and we have some great doctors who are moms that help tell about this. I do this a lot on my social media. It's food.lies. If you want to follow me, or food lies on different platforms, I'm there. But a lot of this, I mean, partly it's changing the mindset. First, you have to learn, right? So, like, step one is know that whole foods are better and what processed foods are, right? So, hopefully, I think you're talking about people who've already gotten that step. So now they're on step two. It's like, okay, well, how do I do this sustainably? How do I make this part of my life? How can I afford this? It's a journey. I think that one of the big things is people have to realize it's not gonna happen overnight. I didn't just wake up 10 years ago and, like, just start eating regenerative eggs from the farmer's market. It is a journey, so it's you start doing things that are manageable, and you start replacing the big things that matter first, right? So, like, part of the tips, it's, okay, what are the most processed foods that you're currently buying? Right, and how can I get rid of some of those? So are you buying soda? Probably not if you're listening to this podcast. But
Maybe.
are you buying packaged bread or packages of pasta, right? Because maybe they're like, "Oh, it's only a couple ingredients, this package of bread, this package of pasta, it's only a couple ingredients, it's not that bad, it's very handy." So it's like, well, how can I get rid of these foods that aren't too good for you, right? They're not the worst maybe in the whole world, but, like, how do I get rid of some of these and just get more meat, more eggs, more fish, just something like you don't have to drastically change what you make. It's like, what if I just added more of the fish and I just had less of the pasta? Or what if I just next week I just didn't buy pasta anymore and I just made some extra vegetables with the meat or fish, right? It's like you just have to replace that. And then what that does, it actually just raise your nutrient to energy ratio, right? My whole thing about, your nutrients versus energy, if you get rid of the bread and pasta in your meals and replace it with more fish, chicken, eggs, meat, whatever, that just did you a huge service. That completely changed, like, my little balance. That by eating, this is all I did really. This was it 10 years ago. I was just eating normal foods, and I was like, okay, well, I love ground beef. What if I just made 2 ground beef patties and didn't eat the bread and didn't have a bun, right? So now I can eat the same things that I like. I had onions, I had some whatever, like, on the side, different side dishes, vegetables, maybe, but I just added 2 hamburger patties instead of the bread, and it was delicious, right? I'm like, I love the hamburger patties. I just thought they were bad for me this whole time. So now I'm eating uh, foods I like. I'm way more full because eating an extra hamburger patty instead of a bunch of bread or pasta will keep you full a lot longer. That's kind of back to the nutrient versus energy. The satiety thing is very big to me, being full. Even with the rodent studies, right? Technically, the rodents, the mice, were not full in a sense, and they kept having to eat the processed food to get what they needed, right? That's basically a sort of satiety, eating till you get what you need thing. And so if you just shift up your protein by whether it's eggs, meat, whatever type of protein, even protein powders, I guess if you're selling, a good quality protein powder, you could add that to a meal, right? And you would be fuller longer. And you it's right? Like I do this sometimes. I could leave out the empty carbs in a meal and then eat have a protein shake after the meal. And it's like a treat. It's delicious. And I'm full for
Yep.
hours, right? So
Yep.
yeah, that's a sort of long-winded way of saying make these simple changes, get rid of the most processed part, the most empty calories part, and then add more protein. And you're you're gonna have great success. It's gonna be affordable. You're gonna be full, you're gonna lose some weight too.
No, I love all that advice. But just to make it clear for the listeners, you're not just a carnivore diet because we've talked a lot about meat. You also believe in the fruits and vegetables needing to be eaten
Oh,
every day.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Never been carnivore. I probably in 10 years I tried it for, 10 days once and maybe a week or two once. Uh, no, no, I don't think that that's necessary or really what humans should do. Maybe if you have Crohn's disease, I've heard a lot of success with certain ailments. You could try to cut out all plant foods to kind of really reset the gut and do some things. But really, any whole foods are going to be good for you, right? And I think fruit is amazing for dessert, right? I don't eat dessert anymore. I eat fruit, right? It's delicious. And yes, in any sort of vegetables, especially if you're cooking yourself, right? Like not adding a whole bunch of weird stuff to it, or not, yeah, not eating spinach every day. I have a little caveat. I got a problem with oxalates because I was doing like kale and spinach and almond milk smoothie things like every day for years, and I don't think that's natural, right? So that's another extreme of like,
You got to mix it up, mix your
yeah, just
fruits and
mix it up
veggies up.
and you are good.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, as we wrap up here, I'm curious with all the food lies you've come across, what is the biggest food lie you wish everyone could unlearn?
Oh man. I just think it's meat is bad. Meat is bad is the biggest food lie, right? Even the WHO in 2015, the World Health Organization said that meat was a carcinogen. They said that processed meat was a carcinogen and red meat was a likely carcinogen or something. And it is insane. It's wrong. It's not true. We've been eating meat for all of history. It's everything that you're eating with that meat is the problem. And I get it, right? They have an agenda for one thing, I think, right? Like I was saying, there's big corporations with agenda, and I think the WHO is really part of that agenda. And I kind of know it is because I interviewed one of the scientists on that panel in 2015. He was there. He was just some USDA scientist, normal guy. I was the only one to ever get an interview with him, actually. I had to get special permission. And he said that it was a bunch of vegans and vegetarians and that they built that all of them were they were ignoring all his studies to show that red meat wasn't bad. He was like, "What are you talking about? Why would red meat be bad?" And he brought these studies to the table. It was the working group. That's how it works. Everyone brings their studies. They didn't look at any of the studies, and they only looked at, these industry funded ones that fit their agenda. And he found out that most of them were vegans and vegetarians. So
Interesting.
red meat is not bad for you, and I just think that that is the biggest food lie, right? Because then you're scared of it, so then you're like, "Oh, what am I gonna eat?" And then you end up eating something worse.
Well, I do have a question really quick about red meat, though. Are you a believer that it should be grass-fed meat and like our eggs should be pasture raised and chickens pasture raised, things like that?
So, yeah, that's a nuanced one. I say absolutely try to do that as best you can. So this is not popular because some of the people in my world, they're like, "No, you gotta tell them that's regenerative or nothing, or, you gotta do it." I'm like, "You actually don't have to do it." It's very, very good for many reasons to get that, right? Very good for your health, very good for the rancher. It's very good for signaling to the industry, to make more of this. But if you really can't afford it, You can go to any grocery store and get meat and eggs, and it is very healthy. It's fine, and it's gonna be better than the alternative, right? It's gonna be better than mac and cheese. It's better than any bread. It's better than any pasta. It is good nutrition. Maybe there are some downsides. Of course, you can get into it. It's like, oh, well, they're feeding the cows this and that. I know that so many millions of people have completely changed their life on grocery store meat. Millions of people, right? I know tons of doctors that work with patients. They work with low income patients. They cannot afford regenerative meat, and they reverse their diabetes, reverse their obesity, and completely change their life on grocery store meat and eggs.
Yeah. It comes down to what I tell my followers is good, better, and best. We can't always afford the best, and good and better sometimes needs to be the option that you choose. So, well, thank you so much for being here. I am really excited to see this series when it comes out. It's going to be so fascinating, something that everybody needs to listen to for sure. I mean, watch for sure. But tell my listeners where they can learn more from you now.
Yeah, follow me on any platform. Just search Food Lies. So that's including YouTube. So if you want to see the intro to Food Lies, it's 3.5 minutes. It's really good. I'd say watch it now, press pause or finish this podcast the last minute, and then watch it on YouTube. Food Lies intro. Just search Food Lies intro and you're going to be excited.
It is a good trailer. I do love it. You did a great job with that. I always end my podcast with asking my guests what they think the best ingredient to life is. What would you say it is?
Oh, wow. Wow. I mean, I guess I have to just say meat to make it simple is even though I'm not a carnivore, I really think it's been the biggest ingredient, like literally, if we're talking about literally, I know that you could take it figuratively as well, but literally meat is the most important thing in human history. We've eaten it forever. It's healthy. It's amazing.
Oh, I love it. I love that take on that. Well, thank you so much for being here. I know the listeners are probably have had their eyes open on a few things. You taught a lot of good information. So thank you so much for being here. And followers, go learn more at Food Lies. And again, thank you for taking the time.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. Remember to subscribe to the Just Ingredients podcast to learn more about your health and good ingredients to life. Plus, get daily tips at just.ingredients on Instagram.